This Friday, French President Emmanuel Macron is hosting a meeting to discuss the future of France's Pacific archipelago, New Caledonia. It comes after the signing in July of the so-called Bougival Accord, which is notably due to create a new Caledonian state within France, enshrined in the French Constitution. Today's meeting is intended to provide clarifications about that agreement, but New Caledonia's main independence movement, the Kanak and Socialist National Liberation Front, announced this week that they will not attend. Well, for some insight, we can speak to Andrew Smith, a historian of modern France and the director of liberal arts at Queen Mary University of London. Good morning. It's good to talk to you.
Good morning.
Can you start by explaining why the pro-independence camp has rejected this deal, especially because, from my understanding, they were part of, coming up with it and signed it initially back in July before rejecting it just a couple days later?
Much of this relates back, of course, to the kind of outbursts of violence in 2024, and then subsequently the arrest of some of the FLNKS leaders, specifically Christian Thian, who was arrested, the current president of FLNKS, and imprisoned in France. He's returned to New Caledonia recently, and many of the loyalist forces were extremely unhappy about that. But I think, ironically, you can see one of the reasons that he's refusing to appear, because he did actually appear in Paris yesterday, however, by video call, in a trial of defamation, in which Sonia Baquez, one of the loyalist leaders, had called him the leader of a terrorist group. And of course, he was contesting that and actually using the invitation from Emmanuel Macron to say, well, look, I'm a normative part of political dialogue. So really, it's about political division. And I think that idea of seeing the negativity around what came out of that violence, 15 people dead, billions of euros in damage in 2024. That's what cannot be returned to. And actually, even without the FLNKS, this meeting this weekend promises, I think, some constructive dialogue and a way forward, which might be able to reintegrate the views of the FLNKS in the longer term. So the FLNKS are keen not to be painted as extremists, as terrorists, as people that cannot form part of this dialogue. And at the moment, that's why they feel they cannot be part and endorse something which seems to, in some way, tip its hand towards the loyalists.
Can you talk a little bit more about what actually is in this accord? I mean, are there things within it that they take issue with, or is it more just the image that the government seems to have of them?
Yeah, I mean, so the Bougival Accord, as you mentioned, one of the things, of course, the kind of headline concession is that it allows for the creation of a state of New Caledonia in the French Constitution. It allows for kind of greater powers for the provincial governments there, and that really is where it kind of moves things towards. However, what it also supports is the unfreezing of the electoral lists in New Caledonia. That's who can vote in the elections. Currently, they are frozen at the lists in 1998. Now, the reason for that, of course, is you have a very well-defined Indigenous people, the Kanak, who actually feel that other people who've come and moved to the island and might be numerically superior will change the context of any vote on independence. Likewise, there are provisions there in the Bougival Accord for France to have a sort of a backstop on this, to have last veto over ideas of autonomy. So there are, it's a negotiated settlement which seems to move some people towards it and actually give France some guarantees as well. It's actually been a big issue with the Macronist party. There's an open letter just written recently by Gabriel Attal, of course, former Prime Minister, supporting Nicolas Metzdorf, one of the Macronist MPs in the region. They're quite unhappy about the fact that the government seems to be sort of responding to the FLNKS in their sort of refusal to engage, and they want to make sure that this process moves forward democratically, with or without that quite important voice.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the main kind of headline of the agreement is that it would create a new Caledonian state, but that would still be within France. So it seems like it kind of shuts the door to New Caledonia ever really having actual independence. Is that kind of a non-starter for those pro-independence group, or is there anything that France could offer them that would sort of make up for not having their full independence?
It's a challenge, and of course the the kind of Kanak political cause is not uniform. At the moment, with the FLNKS, with Christian Tian at its head, it represents perhaps some of the more kind of militant tendency. He was, of course, part of a group, the CCAT, which was seen as being one of the more strident and at the heart of those roadblocks and all the rest of it back in 2024. There are other forces. Of course, you can see the president, the government of New Caledonia, Alison Sargent, a Kanak man who is maybe more kind of loyalist in terms of his views, and there are others who are kind of more keen for independence, but maybe not right now. So there are a number of different political forces at work, and it's important to look to that idea of political plurality. Of course, what's really at issue is we've had a series of referenda around independence in 2018, 2020, and 2021, although the last one was boycotted by pro-independence groups. And actually that's, set the tone for that kind of really difficult confrontation. Likewise, there are provincial elections due. They were meant to take place in 2024. They were postponed to 2025. And actually one of the things the Bougival Agreement said is they will take place in 2026. The French Constitutional Court has said those elections cannot be delayed again, or it's unconstitutional. But they've said that they can maintain the same electoral lists. However, the loyalist groups have actually are threatening to go to the European Human Rights Court to say that actually this is a breach of human rights for people who are resident in New Caledonia to be excluded from these electoral lists. So my point there is simply that there are a lot of moving parts here, a lot of dialogue that's needed in terms of construction. And I think these meetings this weekend are really important because it brings very senior political figures, President of the National Assembly, President of the Senate, of course the President of France, into conversation with around 75% of the members of New Caledonia's Caledonian Congress, and will hopefully be able to kind of reassure some people, move some things forward. And even if there are no solutions today, what it does is reestablish the basis for productive conversations.
The way you describe it, though, I mean, it sounds like, as you said, lots of moving parts, lots of pluralities of opinion on both sides, but it still seems like the two kind of most extreme camps are kind of fundamentally at odds. Given that, I mean, how do you foresee this proceeding and moving forward? Do you think we might, is there going to be real progress, or ultimately are we going to get back to sort of an impasse?
If I had to predict something, I would say that I don't see any lasting solutions coming out of this meeting. But actually, I have to say, I don't think that's the fault of the FLNKS. For all of this to happen, there needs to be constitutional amendments made. That means that ultimately it's going to have to go through the French National Assembly. And whatever happens in terms of bridging these political divides, whatever happens around negotiating sovereignty, I think one of the biggest roadblocks to anything that's going to happen is moving this type of paper through the National Assembly itself, given the current state of division. So no, I don't think what we're going to see is a solution coming out of this weekend. But I think what we are seeing is a re-engagement from the President of France and a real commitment to move things forward. I think the idea, the presence of those loyalist parties means that they are a greater part of that discussion. But nothing can move forward without the participation of the Kanak people. Ultimately, deciding the sovereignty of New Caledonia, as I think we'll see represented in international law, needs to involve the voice of the Kanak people. So no, I don't see anything coming out of this today. I don't think it's useless. I think it moves forward political discussions. It lowers the tension in terms of that simmering kind of undercurrent of threats of violence and kind of language being used against different political opponents. But really, I think we are moving perhaps further towards a solution, if still blocked.
It's those baby steps. Andrew Smith, thank you again so much for speaking to us today. That's Andrew Smith, a historian of modern France and the director of liberal arts at Queen Mary University of London.